Hello to all of you at City Valley. We love City Valley, Darren and I, and we love your leadership team. And it's so good to be speaking to you again. I'm really looking forward to one day being back with you in person, which would be amazing. So today we're going to start in Proverbs 4 and verse 23. It says, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. And there is an urgency in this plea to guard our hearts. Why is that? Well, everything you are, everything you think, that you say, that you do, flows from your heart. So guarding your heart is vital. And in Jewish thought, your heart wasn't just the seat of your emotions, perhaps as our present culture would think about it. The heart was the seat of the thoughts, the will, the conscience, and the emotions. It was the central animating core of all a person was, what drove them, what defined their values, what set the direction of their life, what determined their priorities. If someone were to analyse your life, your thoughts, your speech, your actions, I wonder what their conclusions about your heart would be. What does drive you? What are your priorities? See, Billy Graham said this. He said, give me 5 minutes with a person's checkbook and I'll tell you where their heart is. Now, these days, that might be a bank statement or a credit card statement, but give him 5 minutes with those things and he will tell you where your heart is. So what is your heart like? Well, we are followers of Jesus, not just followers by observation, but those whose hearts have been changed to be like his. We've been born again. We have divine DNA, as it were. We have the mind of Christ and the heart of Christ. What is the heart of Christ? Well, in Matthew 11 and verse 29, it says, I am gentle and humble in heart. And this was the only time that Jesus talked about his own heart. And the word translated humble here is usually translated as lowly or downtrodden, brought low by life circumstance, or relating to low social or economic rank. For Jesus to be lonely was to be accessible and approachable, easily related to by the man or the woman in the street. Lepers no one else would touch. Jesus touched them. Outcasts like Zacchaeus, Jesus went to his house. The crippled woman who Jesus called out of the crowd. Hated foreigners like the Samaritan woman. He encouraged people to come to him and touch his heart. He made it easy for them to do so because he was gentle and approachable and bursting with compassion. Matthew 14, it says, Jesus landed and saw a large crowd and he had compassion on them and healed their sick. And again in Matthew 9, when he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. The Greek word for compassion used in these texts refers most literally to the guts of a person, an ancient way of referring to what rises up in our innermost core. It reflects the depths of Jesus' heart. Jesus didn't just have a vocation to reach out to the vulnerable and the needy, those regarded as lowly. He was drawn to them by the very nature of his heart. Jesus' heart of compassion moved him to share life with people, to live with them, to hang out with them, to be friends with them, those who were rejected by the religious and the respectable. Jesus' opponents criticized him as a friend of tax collectors and sinners, one who eats and drinks with them. This was Jesus' heart. By spiritual nature, you and I now have his heart. But how powerfully are the qualities of his heart pushed aside by the importance of our own welfare, our own satisfaction and pleasure? How quickly are the desires of his heart submerged by the fear in mine, or the weakness in mine? Remember, everything we do and say and think flows from our heart. And the outworking of our following Jesus, what we do, how we impact others, Christians and non-Christians alike, comes from the state and the nature of our heart and how closely it resembles his. Jesus' heart of compassion, his gentleness and lowliness, his accessibility and approachability, his relatability, They all overflowed in friendship and in time and in caring and in eating and drinking, in healing, in mourning, in celebration, even in homelessness and poverty. When Jesus' heart is truly beating at its most powerful within us, our hearts overflow in the same way. When Jesus was asked for the greatest commandment, he gave 2 commandments as his answer. He said the second one, love your neighbour as yourself, was like the first one. Love God with everything you have. Jesus saw the 2 as inseparable. One leads to the other. Jesus lived to engage with the world, to break into it with his love and his power, to call people to follow him, and then to send them out to call others. We are not truly loving God if we are not also actively loving those around us and calling them to follow Jesus. And earlier we read 2 verses that highlighted Jesus' compassion. And in both cases, that compassion leads Jesus to teach his disciples that they were part of the outworking of that compassion. In Matthew 14, when it said Jesus landed and saw a large crowd and had compassion on them and healed their sick, it goes on to say that as evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a remote place, and it's getting late. Send the crowds away that they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food." And Jesus replied, "They don't need to go away. You give them something to eat." Jesus' compassion leads him to challenging the disciples to demonstrate that compassion to the people. And in Matthew 9, where it said Jesus saw the crowds and had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless, he then said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field." Jesus' compassion leads to a focus on the harvest and instructing the disciples to pray for workers. The disciples themselves being the first in line, of course. In Matthew 28, 18 to 20, prior to his resurrection, Jesus commanded his disciples, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything that I have commanded you." Jesus' heart of compassion for those around him was the catalyst for him urging the disciples to pray for workers for the harvest, and then to send those same disciples in answer to their own prayer. Jesus' heart of compassion in us, if we are open and obedient, will provoke us to pray for the harvest and then engage with those around us in order for us to love them and to make them disciples. See, God did not call us as individuals to social action programs and church outreach initiatives. God did not call us as individuals to social action programs and church outreach initiatives. Now, don't misunderstand me. These things aren't wrong. They're good, but they are an added extra in our lives. We are called to love anyone that God puts in our path, whether that's our colleague at work, our next door neighbour, the person next to us at the book club or the dance class or wherever we go in our world. We're also called to love and serve those that are not directly in our path, but they are part of our wider community. And this is particularly true for the poor, the marginalised, the foreigner and the sick. We're called to a lifestyle of engaging, loving and serving our world and making disciples of those who respond to that love and that service. Sometimes there are simple things that we can be involved in. So our testimony over the last few months is this: we've been challenged by this. And so we've been getting involved in local communities through a number of activities to serve local people. One of those is picking up litter from local streets and just talking to local people while we do it. Another one involves local walks, inviting local people to join us and to chat and to engage with people as we walk along. We're also hoping to be part of a social prescribing program in the community where GPs prescribe walking and community to their patients for the benefit of their mental and physical health, and then work with local groups who can provide this as a service. Wouldn't that be amazing? People are prescribed a walk and a chat with me. Amazing. We need to pray for and identify those who are open to the gospel, that we naturally connect with, and some that we don't. It requires an investment of time, of love, of friendship, of service. Time we could have spent doing other things, perhaps even church things. How do we connect with those we wouldn't normally meet, particularly those of a different age or background or culture? We have to intentionally engage with parts of our local community that we wouldn't normally come into contact with as part of our daily routines. Again, for the last few months, I've been prayer walking around various parts of my local area, sometimes with Daryl, sometimes on my own, praying for God to move and to have meaningful conversations along the way. We've been praying much more intentionally about non-Christians that we know. And we also pray every week with other Christians for a variety of local initiatives, including some of those I mentioned earlier. Going out into our world and engaging with people where they are, in their worlds, their streets, their homes, their social places. Not trying to bring them into our meetings. The gospel is the power of God. Our meetings are not. And the gospel can work as powerfully in you as it can in your elders and leaders. I just want to consider for a moment a testimony from the Darlington Food Bank that you may have heard about fairly recently. So for a number of years, maybe 7 years, Darlington have run a very successful and well-regarded food bank out of their building. And lots of people have come and been served and been fed, and it's been amazing. And then lockdown arrived. What were they going to do? And what they did was this. They prayed even more than before, and they took their service out into the car park. And what happened? Well, as they took the food into the car park and talked to people and engaged with them in the car park rather than the building, something very different happened. People began to be more open. People began to talk. Some people talked to them in their cars. And gradually over the year, people began to respond to the gospel, even though no one had responded to the gospel through the food bank for the previous 7 years. And it was one, then two, then half a dozen, then a dozen. And the last time I had an update from them, perhaps a month ago, the number stood at 33 people who had given their lives to Jesus as a result of talking to someone in the car park. There were also a number of healings and people set free from addictions. Isn't that amazing? God is still working in our nation. He's working through our churches. See, in the UK, we have fallen into a culture of measuring the success of our churches by how many people are there on a Sunday or are in our small groups. But what if we were to measure the success of our churches by how many people outside of our church meeting we were each loving and serving? How many new disciples each of us were reaching and baptizing and teaching to obey everything Jesus commanded, not through our church programs, but through us. There is a quote from Rick Warren which says this: "You measure a church's strength not by its seating capacity, but by its sending capacity." So, how strong is your church? Do you as an individual represent seated capacity or sent capacity? Do I? How effectively are we being released and sent? What would this look like for you? I want to challenge you to think and discuss and pray about these questions. And as we emerge from this pandemic, re-looking at life and re-looking at church, I believe we need to experience afresh what it means to follow Jesus and have his heart. Everything we do flows from our heart. Jesus was a friend of sinners, gentle and lowly in heart. The question that we need to ask ourselves today is this: Am I? Am I a friend of sinners? Am I gentle and lowly in heart? Well, I hope you have a great time thinking about those and praying about them, discussing them in the weeks or so to come. It's been lovely to be with you, even if it's been remotely, and I will see you again soon. God bless all of you.